There is a seat in a boat, a wooden lifeboat lowered by rope into the black North Atlantic on the night of the 14th of April, 1912. In it sits a girl of 18. She is 5 months pregnant. Above her, on the tilting deck of the largest ship ever built, stands her husband, one of the richest men in the world. And he is not getting in. He has helped her over the rail. He has asked, quietly, whether he might come too, on account of her condition. He has been told no. And so the ropes pay out, and the girl goes down into the dark, and the man stays up in the light, and the two of them are never in the same world again. She survives. That is the whole hinge of her life. She is given the seat, and the sea takes him instead. Think about what that seat cost, and what it bought. It bought her 50 more years of life she was never guaranteed. It bought her a son she would deliver 4 months later into a world that already knew his father's name from the front page. And it bought her, on paper, one of the largest widow's fortunes in America. Millions in trust, mansions on 2 coasts, the Astor name stitched to her like a second skin. She could have kept every cent of it. All she had to do was stay a widow forever. And here is the question this film is going to spend the next hour trying to answer. Here is the thing that doesn't fit. Why does a young woman handed the richest widowhood in the country, a fortune most people would guard with their lives, give it away, on purpose, not once but twice, walking out of the money and into the arms of men who could never replace what she'd lost? What was she reaching for that all the Astor money could not hold? Keep the seat in mind, the seat in the lifeboat, and everything she was willing to trade to feel warm in it. We'll come back to it. To understand the fortune she walked away from, you have to start before the fortune. Because Madeleine Force did not grow up in Astor. She grew up watching that world from the near side of the glass. She was born Madeleine Talmadge Force on the 19th of June, 1893, in Brooklyn, New York. Her family was comfortable, respectable, well-connected. But they were not the 400, not the sealed inner circle of old New York money that the Astors sat at the very top of. Her father, William Hurlbut Force, ran a successful shipping and forwarding firm downtown. Her mother's family had produced a mayor of Brooklyn a generation or two back. This was solid, striving, upper-middle American money. Money that could send its daughters to the right schools and dress them beautifully. But not money that opened every door automatically. Madeleine and her older sister, Catherine, were raised for a particular purpose, the way girls of their class and moment were, to be poised, cultured, charming, and eventually to marry well. She was educated at private schools, spent long stretches of her childhood abroad, especially in France, and grew into exactly the sort of young woman the society pages liked to notice. Newspapers of the day, cooing over the two sisters, are said to have called them the Two Graces. On the 22nd of December, 1910, Madeleine was formally presented to New York society as a debutante. She was 17. The whole apparatus of her upbringing had been pointed at this. The season, the dances, the careful placement of a pretty, well-mannered girl into the current of eligible marriages. And it was in that current, in the summer just before her debut, that she met the most complicated fish in the water. His name was Colonel John Jacob Astor IV. And to understand why a match between them would detonate across the front pages of the country, you have to understand what a wounded, scandalous figure he already was when this teenage girl crossed his path at a Maine resort. Astor was in his mid-40s. He was one of the richest men alive. An estimated fortune in the tens of millions, hotels the world had heard of, whole districts of Manhattan real estate throwing off rent. He was also a builder, an inventor, an awkward and restless man more at ease with machines than with people. And, crucially, he was fresh out of a spectacular, humiliating divorce. His first wife, Ava, had left him in a very public unraveling that had dragged his private life through every gossip column in America. Divorce, in 1910, in that airless upper class, was itself a scandal. A divorced Astor, wealthy and available, and prowling the summer resorts, was a scandal walking around on 2 legs. So picture the collision. A demure, unknown girl of 17. A notorious, newly single millionaire, nearly 30 years her senior, worth a sum most people couldn't imagine. They were seen together, at dances, on drives, on his yacht, and the rumors began at once. For more than a year the whispers built. And Madeline Force, presented to society to marry well, had, by any cold accounting, marched off and landed the single largest fortune on the board. She had won the game she'd been trained to play. What no one could have told her, what no one could have known, was that the prize came with a fuse already lit, 4 days out of Southampton and burning toward her across the following spring. When the engagement was finally announced in the late summer of 1911, the country reacted about the way you'd expect the country to react. He was 47. She was 18. A gap of 29 years yawned between them. And it was not the only problem. Astor was divorced, and to a great many Americans in 1911, a divorced man had no business marrying again at all while his first wife still lived. This was not a fringe view. It was the establishment view. So the wedding hit an obstacle almost nobody today would predict. They had trouble finding clergy willing to perform it. By the accounts that survive, one Episcopal minister after another declined to marry them, unwilling to bless the remarriage of a divorced man. The couple that could buy nearly anything in America could not, for a while, simply buy a wedding. On the 9th of September, 1911, they were finally married at Beechwood, the Astor family's mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. In his mother's ballroom, by a minister of a congregational church, one of the few willing to do it. And in a detail that will matter enormously later in this story, the best man at that wedding was the groom's own son. His name was Vincent Astor. He was 19 years old, a year older than his father's new bride. He stood up beside his father, performed the duty, and, by every account we have, privately loathed the young woman his father had married. That resentment would harden into something permanent. And decades later, it would fall on the child she was already, that autumn, beginning to carry. Astor, for his part, seemed genuinely unbothered by the uproar. After the ceremony, taking his young wife aboard his yacht, he is reported to have made a small public defense of second marriages, that now that he was happily wed, he didn't much care how strict the divorce laws were made, that marriage was the happiest condition available to a person, and that a man ought to be allowed one fresh start at it. It reads, across a century, as a man in love and slightly defiant about it. And then they did what wounded, over-scrutinized couples of that class did. They left. To let the noise die down, the Astors embarked on a long honeymoon abroad, sailing first on the Titanic's own sister ship and touring Egypt and Europe through the winter of 1911 into the spring of 1912. Somewhere on that journey, Madeline became pregnant. And as the season turned and the young wife's condition made a long stay abroad less appealing, the couple decided it was time to go home to New York, to the mansion, to the family, to the future. They booked their return passage on the newest, largest, most talked about ship in the world. A ship advertised as practically unsinkable. They boarded her at Cherbourg, France, on the 10th of April, 1912. The colonel, his teenage wife, her maid, his valet, a nurse, and the couple's pet Airedale. She was 18 years old, 5 months pregnant, married to one of the richest men on earth, coming home to begin her real life as an Astor. She had 4 days left of the life she'd planned. You know the ship. You know the ending of the ship. What this film cares about is one specific person on one specific deck and the exact seam in her life where everything divided into before and after. Late on the night of the 14th of April, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg. The blow was so glancing that many passengers barely felt it. But below the waterline, the sea was already coming in, and the men who understood ships understood, within the hour, that this one was going to die. Up on the boat deck, in the freezing dark, the order went out that has echoed for over a century: women and children first. And here we arrive at the seat. By the accounts of the survivors, Colonel Astor brought his young, pregnant wife to lifeboat number 4 and helped her over the rail into it. Then, knowing her condition, knowing she was carrying his child, he asked the officer in charge whether he might be allowed to come too, to look after her. The officer, Charles Lightoller, refused him. No man was to enter the boats while there were still women to load. Astor did not argue. By the testimony of a fellow first-class passenger who watched it happen, the colonel simply stepped back, asked which boat number it was so his wife could be found later, and stood aside to wait with the other men. And so the boat was lowered. Madeline went down the side of the ship in the dark, away from her husband and out onto an ocean so cold it could stop a heart in minutes. She was among the roughly 700 who lived. Her husband was among the roughly 1,500 who did not. His body was recovered days later by a ship sent north to gather the dead. They knew him by the initials in his coat, and in his pockets were his effects, including a gold pocket watch that would pass to the son who had stood as his best man and who would carry it against his chest every day for the rest of his own life. The survivors were picked up by the Carpathia and carried to New York, into a city convulsed with grief and morbid fascination. Madeline Astor, 18, widowed, pregnant, and now one of the most famous women in America, whether she wanted to be or not, was brought home and, in the language of the day, kept in strict retirement, shielded, hidden. Her first public statement about that night came not from her own mouth but through a spokesman, a trustee of the Astor estate. She did not emerge for weeks. When she finally did, one of her first public acts was quiet and telling. She hosted a small luncheon to personally thank the captain of the Carpathia and the ship's doctor, the men who had pulled the living out of the water. She did it alongside another Titanic widow, two young women in black, saying thank you to the men who had saved them in a mansion built by a man the sea had kept. And then, on the 14th of August, 1912, 4 months to the day after the ship went down, in the Astor mansion on Fifth Avenue, Madeline gave birth to a son. They named him John Jacob Astor VI. The newspapers, unable to resist, named him something else. They called him the Titanic baby. He would carry that headline his whole life, the way his mother carried the seat in the boat. A public identity assigned on the worst night of a stranger's life and never fully shed. She was 19 now. A widow, a mother, and, as she was about to discover an exact and binding legal language, a very rich woman with a very specific set of chains. When John Jacob Astor's will was read, it laid out a fortune vast enough to reorganize several lives at once. And it laid out, for his young widow, a golden cage with a single, unmistakable door. The estate was colossal. Astor's personal fortune has been estimated at roughly $87 million, a figure that lands somewhere well over $2 billion in today's money. Though, as with all these Gilded Age numbers, the estimates run wide depending on how you value the real estate. The bulk of it, the hotels, the land, the name, the burden, went to his eldest son, Vincent, who at 20 became one of the richest men in America overnight. His daughter Alice received a large trust, and his unborn child, the baby not yet delivered, was set up with a trust fund of his own, some $3 million, to come under his control when he grew up. And for Madeline, the teenage widow, the will was, on its face, generous. She was left a sum outright. She was given the income from a trust fund of $5 million, an annual river of money large enough to keep her in the first rank of American wealth for the rest of her life. And she was given the use, for as long as she lived, of the great houses, the mansion on Fifth Avenue and the estate at Newport with their furnishings. But every provision that mattered, the trust income, the mansions, the security, came fastened to one condition, one sentence. She would keep all of it only so long as she never remarried. Sit with the shape of that. A man of 47, dead in the freezing Atlantic, reaches out of the water through his lawyers and lays a claim on the next 50 years of an 18-year-old's life. Stay mine, the will says. Stay a widow, stay in my houses, stay under my name, and you will want for nothing. Choose another man, choose your own warmth, your own future, your own second act, and the river runs dry. The doors lock behind you. You walk out with far less than you walked in with. This is the bargain at the center of Madeline Astor's life, and it's the exact inverse of the more famous Astor tragedy, the one about the son who inherited everything. Vincent Astor spent his life clinging to the fortune, treating every human bond as a transaction, unable to be loved because he only knew how to be paid for. He kept the money and lost the warmth. His teenage stepmother was handed the opposite choice, written into law. And what she would do with it, twice, tells you she was made of something different. Because Madeline Astor, given a fortune on the condition that she stay lonely inside it, would look at that condition and, when the moment came, choose the warmth and let the fortune go. For a while, She simply lived the widow's life the will prescribed. She raised her son, largely out of the public eye, in the Astor houses, on the Astor money, under the Astor name. She was young, beautiful, unimaginably eligible, and legally forbidden, on pain of losing everything, to act on any of it. She kept that arrangement for 4 years. And then a childhood friend came back into her life, and she made the first of the 2 decisions that define her. This is the bargain at the center of Madeleine Astor's life, and it's the exact inverse of the more famous Astor tragedy, the one about the son who inherited everything. Vincent Astor spent his life clinging to the fortune, treating every human bond as a transaction, unable to be loved because he only knew how to be paid for. He kept the money and lost the warmth. His teenage stepmother was handed the opposite choice, written into law. And what she would do with it, twice, tells you she was made of something different. Because Madeleine Astor, given a fortune on the condition that she stay lonely inside it, would look at that condition and, when the moment came, choose the warmth and let the fortune go. For a while, she simply lived the widow's life the will prescribed. She raised her son, largely out of the public eye, in the Astor houses, on the Astor money, under the Astor name. She was young, beautiful, unimaginably eligible, and legally forbidden, on pain of losing everything, to act on any of it. She kept that arrangement for 4 years. And then a childhood friend came back into her life, and she made the first of the 2 decisions that define her. In 1916, at 23, Madeleine Astor gave the fortune back. She married a man named William Carl Dick, a banker, an heir to a sugar refining fortune, and, by most accounts, a friend she had known since childhood. It was a far quieter affair than her first wedding. She wore a simple suit. The ceremony was small, managed carefully to keep the crowds outside under control. Her father gave her away, and by marrying, she triggered the clause. The trust income stopped. The right to live in the Astor mansions ended. She surrendered the security that a dead man had built specifically to hold her. Now, let's be careful and fair here, because it's easy to over-romanticize. Dick was himself a wealthy man. Madeleine was not marrying into poverty. She was not going to scrub floors. But make no mistake about the scale of what she let go. The Astor Trust was one of the great widows' fortunes in America, and the houses were among the most famous private residences in New York. She traded the top of the pyramid for something further down it, and she did it knowingly, and she did it for the oldest reason there is. She wanted a marriage. A real one. A husband who was actually alive, actually beside her, actually chosen. Not a will, not a name, not a set of rooms she was permitted to haunt. With Dick, she had 2 more sons, William and John, and for a stretch of years, this looks, from the outside, like the ordinary happiness she had reached for. She had stepped out of the headlines. She had stepped out of the Astor cage. She was a wife and a mother of 3, no longer defined solely by the worst night of her life. If the story had ended here, it would end warm. It did not end here. His name was Enzo Fiamonte. He was a professional boxer from a village in southern Italy, 26 years old, strikingly good-looking, and, by the arithmetic that scandalized society all over again, about 14 years younger than Madeleine. He was, in fact, only a few years older than her eldest son, the Titanic baby. The romance moved fast and loud. Barely 4 months after her Reno divorce, on the 27th of November, 1933, Madeleine married Fiamonte in New York City. The tabloids feasted. The Titanic widow, the tragic girl from the lifeboat, now a woman past 40, had run off with a young Italian pugilist. It had every ingredient the papers loved: money, youth, a foreign fighter, a famous name, an age gap pointing the other way this time. For a time, they lived the life of the idle rich, a large estate in the South, a home in Palm Beach, travel abroad. But this marriage, the one she'd sacrificed the most spontaneous version of herself to enter, curdled fastest of all, and here the record turns quietly dark. When the marriage ended in 1938 in West Palm Beach, Florida, Madeleine did not divorce Fiamonte on some polite, face-saving technicality. She divorced him on the grounds of extreme cruelty. Weigh the whole arc of it. She had walked out of the Astor fortune to marry a friend, and that marriage had gone cold. She had then walked out of the comfort of that second marriage to chase something younger and hotter and more alive. And that one had ended in a courtroom, on the grounds that the man had been cruel to her. Twice she had traded security for warmth. Twice the warmth had failed her, and the second time it had turned on her. She was 45 years old. She took back the name Dick, not Astor, not Fiermonte, but the name of the quieter middle chapter. And she withdrew from the noise for the last time. And this is where Madeline Astor's story and Vincent Astor's story, the stepmother and the stepson who despised each other, arrive at the same terrible place from opposite directions. Vincent kept the fortune and could never buy the warmth. Madeline gave the fortune away, reaching for the warmth, and the warmth kept slipping through her fingers anyway. He proved money can't purchase love. She proved that giving up the money doesn't guarantee it either. Between the two of them, they map out the whole cruel geometry of the thing. That connection is not for sale, and it is also not simply waiting on the other side of any brave leap. Sometimes you jump toward it, twice, with everything you have, and you still land alone. By the last years of the 1930s, the girl who had been given the seat in the boat was living quietly in Florida, twice divorced, her great romances behind her, her health beginning to fail. She did not have long. Madeline Talmadge Force. Astor, then Dick, then Fiermonte, then Dick again, died at her home in Palm Beach, Florida, on the 27th of March, 1940. She was 46 years old. The official cause was heart disease. But she died young and quietly, and there has long been a shadow over exactly how. Some who knew her, and some accounts written since, have quietly wondered whether her death involved an overdose of prescription medication, whether the heart that gave out was helped along. It is worth being very clear about this. That is speculation. The recorded cause of death was a heart ailment. The rest is the kind of rumor that gathers around a famous, sad, and beautiful woman who dies too soon, and it should be named as rumor, not fact. She was 28 years past the night the ship went down. She had outlived her first husband by nearly 3 decades. Decades the seat in the lifeboat had bought her. And when she died, she was brought back to New York and laid to rest in a mausoleum beside her mother in the same cemetery where the Astor dead lay. In the end, the name she'd surrendered twice for love reclaimed her anyway, which brings us back, as promised, to the seat in the boat. Remember the question we opened on. Why does a young woman handed the richest widowhood in America give it away, on purpose, twice? We can answer it now, and the answer was there in that boat the whole time. She had been made, at 18, into a survivor. The seat in the lifeboat did not just save her body, it defined the rest of her. She spent 28 more years knowing, at a level most of us never have to know it, that a life can end in 2 hours on a calm, clear night, and that the only thing worth having while it lasts is not a house or a trust or a name. It is another warm human being, actually beside you, actually alive. She had watched the alternative sink into the Atlantic while she floated away from it. So she chose. Over and over, against her own security, she chose the living over the legacy, the warmth over the vault. The Astor will had offered her a bargain: stay lonely and stay rich. And she looked at that bargain, this girl who had already been to the bottom of the human condition and back, and she refused it. She would rather be poorer and reaching than rich and preserved. That the reaching kept failing. That both marriages she traded the fortune for went cold, and the second went cruel, does not make the choice foolish. It makes it human. She wanted the one thing the seat in the boat had taught her was the only thing that mattered. She wanted it badly enough to give away a fortune for it. And the fact that she never quite caught it is not a verdict on her. It's the oldest tragedy there is, that wanting warmth with your whole heart and being brave enough to pay for it still doesn't mean you get to keep it. Her stepson kept his father's watch and his father's fortune and died in empty rooms, unable to spend a cent of it on the warmth he wanted. His teenage stepmother spent the fortune freely, threw it after warmth twice, and still, in the end, died quietly in a beautiful house far from the family that had once been hers. One of them refused to let go of the money. The other refused to let the money hold her. And both of them, from opposite ends of the same lost inheritance, arrived at the same lonely truth. Madeline Astor was given a seat when 1,500 others were not. She was handed a second life and a first-rank fortune in the same freezing hour, and she spent that borrowed life doing the one thing her stepson never could. She let the fortune go again and again to chase the warmth of another person. She never fully caught it, but she never stopped reaching either. And of the two of them, the one who kept the money and the one who kept jumping, it is not at all clear which was the tragedy, and which was the braver way to have spent a life the sea very nearly took.